Awesome. Okay, team. Welcome to the June 9th edition of the Portland Planning Commission. I'll be your chair, Steph Routh. With us online is Commissioner Marian O'Meara. In person, Commissioners Ames, Commissioner Knowles, Commissioner Brannan, Vice Chair Pollack, and Commissioner Thompson. And Commissioner Spivak will be joining us, or Vice Chair Spivak will be joining us momentarily. And we have quorum. And we start out with, are there any items of interest from commissioners? May or may not include shrink wrap. Okay. All right, then we'll pass it straight along to Chief Planner Patricia Diefendorfer for the director's report, please.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Routh. Don't have too much to report on today. Just wanted to make the commission aware that staff has been proceeding with the development and outreach related to the other component of the CEI Hub project, which is, as you all recall, you made your recommendation on the Title 33. There was a proposal to have that accompanied by amendments to Title 17 that would would outline the drawdown program, the 20% drawdown program of the fuel storage capacity in the CEI Hub. That proposal was published late last week or mid last week, I believe, and it is currently circulating for public comment. Public comments are due June 30th, so the comment period is open currently, and the deadline for comments to staff is June 30th. And there are some online sessions that are happening this week, and there was one yesterday in the evening, and there was one today in the lunch hour. And I think there are a couple of other more targeted outreach meetings scheduled, but just wanted to make you aware of the fact that that is progressing, with the idea that those two components would travel together to council ultimately in the fall timeframe. So that's really all I have to update on today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no questions, thank you very much. Awesome. And moving straight along to our consent agenda, which once again comprises one and only one item, which is the minutes from our May 26th. Would anyone like to motion to approve?
So moved.
All right, Vice Chair Pollack, do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Commissioner Brannan, all in favor? Raise your hand. Great. All right, and we are passed. Okay. Today's agenda item is the Central City Code Amendments Project. In our last episode, we had a hearing, and here we are for the work session. So Rachel Hoy and Troy Doss, thank you so much for joining us, and please take us wherever you would like us to go.
Chair Routh, could I jump in with a disclosure, please?
Thank you. Are there any disclosures?
Thank you. This is Commissioner O'Meara. For the record, I work for Central City Concern, and we own multiple properties in the Central City area, which may be impacted by these zoning changes. So wanted to get that on the record today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner O'Meara. Commissioner Ames.
Commissioner Ames, for the record, I work for Walsh Construction, and I found out after the meeting that we have provided some estimating support for the Holy Rosary project. So I wanted to disclose that. I also serve on the Multnomah Athletic Club Land Use Committee, and we're looking at a parcel owned by the MAC. And then I'm a property owner in the Central East Side, but the property that we own is not currently proposed to have any rezoning. So,
Great, thank you, Commissioner Ames. Anyone else? Okay, thank you both so much. Please.
All right, thank you. Once again, I'm Troy Doss with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability Central City team. And with me is Rachel Hoy, our manager. So we'll walk you through, let's see, are we ready? It's taking a second here. All right. So we'll be walking you through these topics, which we've shared with you previously. And we'll go through them one by one, answer any questions you may have about each of these topics as we go through. We're going to start with strategic height amendments. There were some questions. I think there was a fair amount of testimony about why heights, why not more height, why are we regulating height the way we do. And so just to give you kind of a quick overview, historically, the way we've always, well, since 1990 when we've been in really trying to promote housing and mixed-use development downtown, we've had, for height purposes, we've been doing it to try to have higher heights around the transit stations, around the transit mall, around areas where we have high capacity for the infrastructure. We will set heights to not have an impact on protected scenic views or to be out of scale with certain historic districts. We set them to have a varying skyline, and we want to emphasize bridgeheads and key entry points into the central city. We're also trying to set heights to limit the shadows on public properties, especially parks and open space areas. And we're trying to make sure that there's access to light and air into the public realm. So that's the general purpose is how we set heights the way we have. And that's evolved over time, but those have always been the primary principles. So going into what we did as part of the 2035 process, so with the plan right before this, which was adopted in 2018, we wanted to take a look at the scenic inventory that we had at the time, because that was pretty paramount in how some of the heights had been historically set. And when initially those view corridors were created and then the heights were set back in 1990, the technology literally wasn't there. So honestly, staff would go out to a viewpoint, mark it on a map, take a photograph, and then it would be an estimate of how tall you'd go before you'd start to impact that view corridor. With new technologies by 2035 process, we were able to go out, geocode where that site is, model exactly how high a building would get before it impacts that protected resource. And the resources typically are views to Mount Hood or Mount St. Helens, sometimes the river, but generally they're resources from further away. And so what we found when we did that was we actually had a number of areas where we could have increased heights and not impacted those view corridors. We also found a couple areas where the existing heights would impact had they been built out. So we also found there was a few areas in historic districts where the heights were just a little bit higher than they probably should be for the character of that district. So this map on the right shows you areas where, in blue, were areas where we had to go down a little bit to make sure we weren't impacting a resource. And the yellowish gold areas are where we could actually increase heights. And so we did in those areas. Those are areas where we made those shifts as part of the 2035 plan. Coming into this next effort, we wanted to go back to that initial analysis and say, are there areas where there's still some more room? We could probably go increase heights without having an impact in either a historic district or a scenic view. And so these areas that are highlighted in red circles there, those are the areas where we did that. So the map on the right shows you kind of exactly how we did that. If you have any questions about those specific areas, we have smaller maps, we can get into the details. But generally, we were increasing where we had room to grow. Now, as we went into this, one of the things we had heard is the kind of a beginning of this process was there's just not enough height and FAR out there to make residential work. So we wanted to take a look at historically, since 1990, how has the FAR and height bonuses been used? And what we found is historically only about 50% of all projects used the bonus FAR they earned, and therefore they didn't, and only 50% of them used the height as well, because you can't use the height without the FAR, and you got the FAR automatically for doing housing. That was a big incentive at the time, was a housing bonus that said, if you build housing, we will give you 3-to-1 additional FAR to use, because we really wanted to incent housing. So even though we had that really juicy incentive out there, only 50% of the projects used it. And then we found since 2017, the last 10 years or so, only 31% of the projects have even gone above the height that they have available to them. So they could go higher if they had chosen to. Now, in addition to this research,
Sorry to interrupt. Can I
Yes.
ask a clarifying question back on the last slide? The 50% of projects since 1990 used bonus height, and then since 2017, only 31% went above maximum allowable height. Can you clarify how bonus height and maximum allowable height are different? Like, is that the same metric?
it's the same metric.
Stated two
yeah.
different
It's
ways?
the same, yeah.
It is. Okay, thank you.
So we mentioned last time we had Eco Northwest do some additional research for us. So there was this process that was looking at the development allowances and analyzing how they've worked. And the questions they went into with this was, what's the impact on revising zoning? To what extent could revising the zoning entitlements, such as height and FAR, across the different parts of the central city encourage new development? And then are there other constraints? So there are market constraints, infrastructure constraints, site characteristics, other things that are influencing this as well. How do market conditions affect this? So how might varying economic conditions interact with potential zoning changes to shape future development outcomes? And then are there barriers that limit a project's ability to use the existing development incentives? And when I talk about incentives, that would be the bonuses and or the ability to transfer FAR after you've earned a bonus. And I'm going to go through this briefly. If you have additional questions about this research, Tyler Bump with Eco Northwest is here with us as well. One of the takeaways that surprised us a little bit was that there's a sweet spot around 325 feet where projects start to have a better return on the cost of the project. Previously that number had been lower, and that's kind of it was probably around the 225, 270, 250 area. So we're finding now that getting around 325 is economically advantageous if the market supports that. However, that works great on 40,000 square foot sites, less so on 20,000 square foot sites or half block sites and smaller, because the amount of FAR you have is going fully into that form. Your 9-to-1 FAR on a 20,000 square foot site results in about 9 stories. The same amount on a 40,000 square foot is like double that. So to make that work out, more FAR would need to go into the system to be able to make those projects work. Or you'd have to figure out a better way to transfer the FAR to the site. So some of the general findings that were made here was that marking conditions and not zoning are really the limits or what the barrier are right now. Historically, we haven't used all the FAR that was available. Right now, a lot of these projects don't pencil out. So tower developments are not really feasible under today's economics. However, going forward, we should consider increasing heights to around 325, and actually a number of sites, which we went back to that other map, you'd find that we actually did identify a number of sites for this project that could go up to 325, and we've made that adjustment. But those sites also, though, would need additional FAR at some point, or the access to FAR to make them pencil out and fully use that development envelope. And they found that there is an advantage to making some changes here, because it puts it's signaling to the investment industry that we're open for business. We're trying to incent more growth in the central city. However, going back to the FAR, we need to figure out a way to make that system work a little better. One of the things that was found is if you own a lot of property and you have excess bank of FAR, it's fairly easy for you to transfer it. But if you have to acquire it from somebody else or make those, that can be more complicated. So there's certain barriers in that regard. I'm going to pause right there and see if there's any questions about that. Or if you have questions for Tyler.
So I have a question back on kind of what was your first slide. I don't need the slide, but how is you're going backwards in terms of the decisions on height limits to redo the reductions in height in those circled areas. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what's different today from
Further analysis.
Did the
So for the
2035.
views specifically, we realized that we went down on some of those heights, but we probably took them lower than they needed to be to still protect that view corridor. So looking back, we decided we could go up a little bit more and still stay outside of that view cone.
Okay, so the scenic resource is still in place,
in place.
and you're still adhering to that?
We're just maxing out the development envelope until you get to the point just below that
Yeah,
viewpoint.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go on. So going into the Central East Side request for zoning amendments, as you recall, this is what we had last time. So the areas in the deep purple are the areas that were part of the staff proposal, and then the areas highlighted in red are areas where various parties have come in and said that they'd like to see those areas zoned from IG1 to EX. I wanted to give you a little bit of a history on how we have been evolving in this district, though. So as part of the 2035 plan and the Southeast Quadrant Plan, which fed into that, we looked at how's employment working in this district. And in 2006, there had been a study area created called the Employment Opportunity Sub-Area. And it created a 48-acre area where you could do a new commercial use called industrial office. And I'll walk you a little bit through what that means, but it allows for more flexibility, higher density development than a typical industrial use would. And so as part of the 2035 plan and working with the district, we were able to expand that district-wide. So everywhere there's IG1, we were able to apply that same allowance. So it went from 48 acres to 248 acres. Now, industrial office is, a lot of times in the industry probably calls it creative office. So its uses like high-tech design firms, recording studios, those types of things. They're uses that are not only compatible with existing industrial uses and more historic industrial uses, but you also find there's a synergy between those uses. So this diagram here shows the Gardner's and farm building over on the Hawthorne Bridge. It's an area where the ground floor has some manufacturing and furniture, has some industrial service and repair work going on. Upper floors have licensing, have creative advertising, those types of things. Sometimes these firms are each other's clients. And so in these buildings, that works pretty well, and we were seeing a lot of growth in that there. So this allowance addresses that. And if you have an existing building, you can fully occupy that building with an industrial office use. If you're creating a new structure, we allow you to build up to 3-to-1 FAR. And if you put ground floor traditional industrial uses, so manufacturing, industrial service, those types of uses, you could actually earn an additional 1-to-1 FAR, so for a total of 4-to-1 of the industrial office use. So it really is densifying the amount of employment that can be in the district. And it's also addressing the kind of the emerging diversity of industrial uses, because when the industrial sanctuary policies were adopted back in the 80s and 90s, they were really addressing the industry as it looked then. It wasn't really anticipating the growth in tech and biotech and those types of things. So this was a way to diversify that and increase the densities. Now, kind of going through how we did this in the past, prior to 2035, we had a series of areas that were under consideration for rezoning from IG1 to EX. So you look at the first map, it shows you that the OMSI station area, the Clinton station areas, the areas along the orange line were not zoned for anything other than IG1. And there was a series of what we call broken teeth along 3rd Avenue and 6th Avenue. The areas had a comp plan designation of EX, but they were still zoned as industrial. So as part of the 2035 plan, we upzoned those areas. And then as part of this project, we identified a few other areas that could also be rezoned. We looked at the area between Cooch and Davis, the north end of the district, the area between Yamhill and Belmont. We looked at the area down near Ross Island, Sand and Gravel, and then there's of course the two properties that are lower on the MLK Grand. And so the reason we took this kind of a slower approach to how we're rezoning these areas is kind of multifaceted. One, there's infrastructure capacity. This area has been an industrial district since the 1800s. And so the infrastructure that there is really more supportive of industrial as opposed to higher density mixed use development. So when the Pearl was changed to EX, that was done with a lot of work going in at the same time to put the infrastructure in place that would support that kind of growth. That's not occurring here as yet. We also have to consider the buildable lands inventory. So we have, I'll get to that in a little more detail in a moment, to make sure we're maintaining a balance of industrial land supply. One of the other things we want to look at, though, is, and this was a big factor in the 2035 plan, was not doing too much rezoning because we didn't want to spread too much mixed-use zoning out there because it tends to price out the industrial businesses that are there, and the property values go up, so they get displaced. And then another issue is there's focus on kind of the major development sites that are happening around the central city, one of which is in this district, the OMSI district. So we're putting a lot of investment and time and trying to make that site an area that can grow. We're doing the same thing at Broadway Corridor. We'll be doing the same thing with Alpina Vision at the PPS site in the future. So it's how much energy there is to put into these sites and then take on other topics. So going back to the EOA real fast. We looked at this again since last week to say, is there supply? If we were to rezone these properties the way it was proposed and the testifying for additional lands, would there be an impact on the EOA? And the answer is not a significant one. There's excess supply of industrial land in the central city. And the project as we're proposing would really only cut into 2% of that, or 2 acres of the 13 acres of land that is surplus right now. So that doesn't have a huge impact. The bigger impact here is we talked to the infrastructure bureaus last week and see if we were to bring in these additional properties, would the infrastructure be able to support it? And the answer is they just don't know yet. They would have to run some additional analysis to figure that out. That will take a little bit of time. And overall, when we did the 2035 plan and the district approach to this district, and there was a lot of thought, a lot of conversation going on with the industrial users as well as the mixed-use developers to make sure we had a balance here and we were doing a district-wide approach to how we were doing this. So if we're going to get too further down the road on making some other zone changes here, we would recommend that there's probably more of a district-wide approach to how we look at this as opposed to just kind of piecemeal doing big chunks at a time. So let's pause here, see if there's any questions. Yes.
It could be just me, but I was having a little bit of a hard time keeping up with the diagrams, like the 3 side-by-side pre-2035, 2035, and what's proposed now. I don't know how much we have to cover today or how deep in the weeds others want to get on this. I'm happy to either defer to a follow-up conversation, but I just, with the colors on these different maps, was curious if you could, like, again, describe, like, what exactly we're seeing and what, like, the trends are, especially moving into the dark purple, just wanting to confirm that those are the proposed sites that would be added to EXD. Okay.
So pre-2035, any area that's shown on this map that's purple is zoned EX, central employment. So it's a higher density mixed-use residential. And then all the gray area is predominantly the IG1, the industrial, light industrial zoning. So as we went into the 2035 plan, we looked at areas where along the corridors where properties remained that hadn't been EX, we rezoned those. We also took the OMSI station area and the Clinton station area and rezoned those to EX as well. The reason that these OMSI and then this area just north of Powell are being shown as more of a reddish color is because it was EX, but we put a housing prohibition on them. So we were still trying to make them primarily employment, but not for mixed-use residential. The reason for doing that was there were some adjacent industrial uses of more of a heavier industrial nature, and we didn't think it was appropriate to allow housing there. Those conditions have changed, so as part of this project, we actually are removing that prohibition. So now those areas, go to the next one, now those areas are fully available for residential development. And then the dark purple areas are the areas that staff has proposed to also rezone to EX as part of this project. We've talked to the infrastructure bureaus, They feel the infrastructure is adequate to support the growth in those areas.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, I guess, you talked about that we'd need to take a more district-wide approach. And I mean, I was looking at the testimony there's the Central East Side Industrial District that represents the constituents in that area. And they've provided a recommendation on some areas that they would want to take a look at too.
Which are the areas?
Areas in darker red, I think, on an earlier chart.
Yeah, these areas here.
Yeah. So I guess, it kind of seems like and I don't know what the effort that they've taken to kind of represent everybody, but, what else needs to happen to, why not just accept these?
So a couple things. One, I can't speak to the degree to which they've done outreach to their more traditional users, so I really don't know that.
Yeah.
What I do know is talking to our infrastructure bureaus, that those are some pretty significant changes in those areas. And they're areas that aren't typically on, areas that have adjacent uses that are like EX type development. So they're concerned, like, transportation wise, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
But the pipes in the ground, water, sewer.
Yeah.
They're very concerned about what those impacts could be. They'd like to analyze it further to make sure that it's capable of doing that.
Chair Rouse, if I could take a moment, sorry, just to embellish on that a little bit. I think what we're trying to convey here is that, and I think we explained this as we did the briefing and sort of preamble to the hearing, is that this project originally was intended to be kind of like a tactical update to the Central City Code to try to facilitate economic recovery in the post-pandemic time that we're in, housing production. So we approach this project kind of with an eye to what can we do that doesn't trigger more substantial infrastructure analysis. And this is, I think we're sort of teetering on the limits here is kind of what we're trying to convey to the commission, is that the areas that are in the darker purple that were the staff recommended changes, I think those are areas where I think there was a sufficient comfort level that the modest nature of those areas, along with, the existing capacity of the infrastructure, that they would not have sort of a negative, impact. I think as we start to expand to other areas in red, those areas start to not only just cumulatively add so much more area that, I think the infrastructure, particularly water and stormwater systems, really start to become a bit of a concern. And, we have said that we're trying to do changes that don't necessitate kind of a much broader transportation and infrastructure analysis. If we start to do those things, we're going to essentially have to pause this project and go back for a number of months and do some further analysis. And it could be a delay of as much as a year. So I think this is what we're trying to have the commission consider and balance. So I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about this. So really what we're trying to convey is, the impacts on the EOA in terms of industrial land supply, not a huge impact in the scheme of things, but the impact in terms of infrastructure and just the defensibility of the analysis and the findings that we have to make for the project. I think that we start to be a little bit concerned about that if we change more of the area. And that's why Troy was saying at that point it would really require much more of a district approach and going back and doing that deeper analysis.
I mean, what if we went back to the CEID and said, are there some targeted areas that are maybe on the smaller side that are, super high priority for them for, a number of reasons? And so maybe the ask is limited, based on kind of their understanding of what's going on. I mean, it's their district, and so understanding like the Ross Island thing, like I don't completely, I'd like to learn more about why we're proposing doing that. But it's like, instead of doing that, maybe there's some areas that are smaller that are a little more targeted within the Central East Side that would make a bigger impact than the rezoning of Ross Island. I don't know.
We can continue to think about that.
yeah.
I mean, Troy, I think, did you mention that Ross Island was already EX, it just needed the prohibition?
No,
the
it's
residential.
currently zoned IH. It's the only property here that's zoned IH, heavy industrial. There's two reasons for why that to support the rezoning of that currently. One, the location's pretty prominent. It's right at the end of the Springwater Corridor Trail, and it creates a little bit of a block between being able to connect over to the OMSI area. If that site were to be redeveloped, that would open that up a little bit more. The other thing is because the site's going to need a fair amount of cleanup and a fair amount of work to clear the site. And so upzoning it this way puts a financial incentive towards doing that. We're keeping it the way it is. It would basically just remain a blighted site. It's not going to be reused as a heavy industrial site.
And is owned by the city of Portland?
Not owned by, no.
Oh.
No. It's privately held. And so they're going to need a little bit of incentive to be able to clean that up. And the rezoning, upzoning it that way would definitely do that.
Who's the owner?
Still, well, I think it's in, it's either Pamplin Group or it's in foreclosure through the Pamplin.
Okay,
Group.
that's what I was wondering, if it was still within that
It's somehow tied up in that, yeah.
economic universe.
Yes. So that's why another point for an incentive to that moves that side along a little bit better.
And it was brought up, whose idea was it to?
Well, ironically, initially, it was essentially a side industrial council that brought it to our attention.
Interesting.
I'm not sure how much board they are with that currently. There's been some shifts in membership and representation there over the last 2 years, but there are still others who were interested in seeing that. And it is a somewhat blighted and somewhat dangerous site in its current condition. It's broken into frequently, and people would like to see it cleared. So are there any questions on this topic? We could go to the next.
I do have one more. Do you have a sense for how many of the sites in the red zones have active industrial uses?
Not exactly. We could do a bit of an inventory of that. There's the three individual blocks to the north. I don't believe they have any. The workshop blocks over by the river do not have any currently operating, although those sites have been used as like laydown sites for industrial operations for decades, on and off. And then there are some down in this lower section. We'd have to do an inventory of that. There is a limited amount of them in the Hawthorne and Madison corridor area. However, one of the reasons we look at it this way, and I'm going to go to a different map here.
And I guess where this is coming from is like there's two separate issues. I think there's trying to prevent existing industrial uses from being pushed out by a zone that changes the financial implications for that site. And then there's also protecting land or space for maybe future industrial uses to come in. And so I'm just trying to understand, like, if in the latter scenario, is that realistic? And have we seen new industrial uses come to this area on sites where there isn't an existing industrial use?
Yeah, so this map on the left, or sorry, on the right, shows you the green sites on there are sites that are listed in the buildable lands inventory. Okay, so one thing I would point out is even on the MLK Grand Corridor, this area north-south has a lot of green on it. Those are properties that, even though they're currently zone EX, they are completely underbuilt and there's a lot of capacity there. Let's just to start with that. There's also, when you get down, you can see some of the green properties down in this southern area. There are also areas that are listed as part of the BLI. And so the idea is that those sites would be redeveloped and at least some of them would carry some industrial jobs on them. Is it your traditional industrial jobs? There's more smaller scale manufacturing, industrial service type things happening in this district now. The warehouse businesses are leaving the district because it doesn't really work for their operations much. So often those buildings are repurposed for industrial office today.
Can I just offer another? We had the EOA team do some analysis for us. We don't have the comparable number for the areas in red. Could you go back to that slide, Troy? But the areas where staff was, or part of the original proposal to rezone from IG1 to EX, so the dark purple on this map, there are 1/3 of the jobs in that area, those areas are industrial. So I don't know what the number is for the other areas. We can find that out and bring that information back to the commission. But I think there's a couple of things to be aware of. I mean, definitely this is an evolving landscape, right? And it has been for some time. There are industrial jobs there. The question, I think it's, it's certainly consistent with the comprehensive plan and the recent EOA that you saw, to try to preserve the land for industrial uses. But we also recognize that in this area, we're anticipating in the 2045 EOA that only 10% of the 4,600 jobs that are expected in these industrial areas in the central city will actually be industrial. So it is a limited number. I think that's in recognition of the land economics in those areas are already such that it's quite difficult for industrial uses to be competitive in those areas. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to preserve that sort of office industrial space for the kinds of uses that Troy was, that one diagram shows. There are some synergies that happen when these kinds of, different kinds of businesses are able to locate together. And they may not be, only a small part of them may be industrial jobs, but the other types of uses help support that. So that's kind of the thinking behind the office industrial. And those are just some numbers for you in case that's helpful.
Just one last point again, all of these green properties here, and most of the green properties on this map are in areas that are already zoned EX. So there's already underutilized and vacant properties that are zoned EX throughout this district. So adding more has a little bit of a watering down impact.
If I may, just one more thing, and then I will stop talking, I promise. I am curious, like offline, potentially, to just continue to like fine tune and understand why certain blocks were or weren't included. I specifically have some familiarity with the site between Stark and Washington and 9th and 10th, which I think is one of the requests for zone change to EX that's identified on the map there. It's been vacant for a long time. I don't know if there's a green underlay that I just can't see because of like the multiple different colors. But that was a project that I worked on for like 3 years before the pandemic, and it was going to be a lab, like a speculative lab building, and it ended up not working out because of what happened with the pandemic. And so to me, it's just like a case study of like, there was a project that fit the zoning overlay that was trying to come in. It didn't work then. It hasn't worked since. It's just sitting empty. And so like, is that the highest and best use of that spot? Probably not. And so just wanting to make sure we're not painting with too broad a brush.
And to be clear, as part of the process, we had mentioned the first hearing that we had done a lot of outreach and had conversations with various parties. Those 3 properties to the north, that was all new to us. That came in as part of the testimony 2 weeks ago. We had run aware of that. The other areas, there had been conversations on and off about should we or should we not go there. So, yeah. Anything else? I go to the next topic.
Wait, I have a question for you, Commissioner Thompson. With that, for example, the speculative manufacturing, what was it?
It was research and development,
okay.
which is an
Okay.
allowed IG1 use.
Is there anything since the pandemic? Is it just market conditions have not
Yeah.
recovered? Or, okay.
That.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on. So this was in response to Commissioner Spivak, so I can get back to him again after this as well. But there was a question about why do we have minimum density requirements? Is there a concern about why would we prohibit smaller scale development in the central city? And we're absolutely not proposing that. The existing minimum density requirements are fairly minor. If you have a base floor area assigned to your site of up to 4:1, the requirements only require you to fill it with, utilize 1-to-1 FAR on the site. So on a small site, that would be a 1-story building. On a site that has up to 5-to-1 FAR to 8-to-1 FAR, the minimum density requirement is 2-to-1, so a 2-story building. And then 9-to-1 or above, it's a 3-story building. The intent of these was to prevent what you're seeing in this image here. This is kind of a case study we've used a couple times. It's not unique to this site. This happened a couple places where you have a 3/4 block site or even a full block site has a small building on it. In this case, it was a fast food building. It was taken down. It was replaced with another one. That's an area that is actually zoned for 175 feet in height and has 4-to-1 FAR, the ability to earn up to 3-to-1 if you're doing mixed-use development. This is a pretty underutilized site, in our opinion. It's also on a site that's on major transit corridor, and a lot of public investment's gone in that area to support higher density development. So that's why we have these. Now, we are making some adjustments to those provisions, though. Before, you couldn't make an adjustment to it through design review or anything. We're now allowing you to make an adjustment to the minimum density requirements. And as I noted last time, we're also expanding the major employment entertainment use provisions to say that those are exempt from these provisions because they're basically empty, tall but empty buildings, so they don't have a lot of floor area in them. So we're trying to make that adjustment. But from a map standpoint, if you really want to get a sense of how this plays out across the central city, the areas in red are areas where you have transit corridors, or the transit mall, bridgehead development areas, and these are the areas where we're requiring a minimum of 3-to-1. As you get a little bit further outside of that area, you go down to a 2-to-1, and as you get on the fringe of the central city, moving into historic districts is also down into the adjacent neighborhoods. It's a 1-to-1 requirement. So we're not prohibiting small scale development. We're just asking for a minimum level of development on these sites. Okay, I'll move on. Ground floor residential. There was a question last time about trying to get these maps. Hopefully you can see these a little better. The map on the left is, as of today, that's where we have a prohibition on ground floor residential. And the reason that was done, it was done really as part of the 2035 plan, was there was concern that we didn't have sufficient ground floor development standards for residential development. And there were a couple streets where we wanted to preserve them as more retail-focused streets. The map on the right shows you once we developed these standards, which we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, we could pull back some of the prohibition. So there's still some streets, major streets along transit corridors, as well as along Burnside, a couple key east-west streets in the retail district that we feel should still retain more of a retail as opposed to housing. But the other areas we're opening up for that type of development. During testimony 2 weeks ago, we heard that there was interest by the Design Commission to modify where the entrances were through those new standards from 6 feet to 7 feet, and specifically because that would allow for an exterior 36 square foot area for those units. We agree with that approach. However, I would note that they were also interested in basically prohibiting interior loaded units. The reason that we put those in that option there was because we found that transitional housing, some senior housing, family compatible housing, affordable housing projects, sometimes they prefer, or in actually projects that have housing for people with accessibility issues, that interior loading works better for them than the exterior loading. So we're just leaving that open as an option there. That's why it was done that way, just to put some clarity to it.
I'm curious about what are potential treatments, because I heard like accessible housing as being a critical component. What is, have there been considerations of what a ramp could look like or how to do front loading?
It all depends on the site. So we have some sites on flat sites, it's probably fairly easy. But we have a number of properties in the central city that are on fairly decent slopes, and it becomes much harder to meet that grade at that point without having interior loaded access.
Okay.
Chair Ralph, maybe I could just quickly, I think what we're saying here ultimately is that the recommendations of the Design Commission to just change those metrics a little bit, we don't have any issue with that. That's, seems fair. I think the bigger issue is the below the line issue of their proposal or their suggestion is that there be no, all ground floor units have to have access from the sidewalk. And I think what we're saying is that given many different factors and conditions and circumstances right now, and the fact that we're trying to allow flexibility, it seems prudent to allow the, that choice to be made by the program of the building, the particularities of the peculiarities of individual sites. And so from our perspective, it seems appropriate to allow both to happen and to, when there are, and to have the design standards to go with that. So that the design standards speak to both when you are doing, entrances from the sidewalk, and there's standards for that. And there's also a response to the way it treats the sidewalk if you're taking your access from inside the building. And I think maximum flexibility right now with all of the conditions, that we're facing in the city and in our downtown, it feels like the prudent thing to do right now.
Well, I think also one of the main conditions that I'm hearing is, I think we're all hearing, is that of public safety and community safety and eyes on the street. And so my question around first floor residential also includes, how do we protect that envelope of the public realm and that relationship to safety? And they're just, if you have windows, someone can watch someone feel unsafe but can't get to them. That is. Does that make sense? Am I making sense to people? Okay, so that's my question, what I'm thinking of.
So just to be clear too, the standard for non-entrance off the street was being lifted and then set back. So the windows would be higher, they would not be at the street level, and you would have a landscape setback between the building wall and the sidewalk as well. So it wasn't, we did have treatments before where they were at the ground level and they were right up on the sidewalk.
Yep.
And that isn't in the past. Yeah, that's where we're trying to get away from that.
So just to follow up on that, my general worry is that we have, for a long time, focused on active uses at the ground level in the central city. It's sort of built into the DNA of our planning for downtown. This feels like we're backing away from that. And I'm just wondering if we have enough data that indicates that if you continue to require ground floor retail, there's just not enough retail available, those spaces are not being utilized? Or are there examples of a lot of ground floor or buildings with ground floor residential that have been built now and just are not providing any active uses? So I'm generally worried about backing away from the idea of active use at the ground level in the central city.
What's the first floor retail vacancy in the city of Portland? I bet it would be
was gonna say,
shockingly high.
It is very high. I mean, we can get you exact numbers. Retail vacancy is quite high. And, the way people are shopping, the challenges that, brick and mortar retail spaces are facing, we don't think that's a condition that is going to be changing. I think we have to think about how our ground floors are used. And I think that this is also based on a premise that ground floor residential actually on some level is activating and can activate. It's better than having absolutely vacant ground floors. And so I think we have to kind of step back and consider the changes, the kind of market shifts that are happening and how we can still have ground floors that contribute to a populated central city, even if they're not activating those spaces in the way that we have traditionally thought. And so a lot of this started with HRR, the Housing Regulatory Relief Project, and some of the newer commissioners were not on the commission at the time. And this was heavily debated then, and it was a temporary measure at the time, right? And we said we would come back with permanent proposal, and this is the permanent proposal. I think, there's very little that has changed, nor is there evidence that there'll be a significant enough change that we should not be thinking differently about the ground floors. And we have, not only do we have vacancy, but there's an opportunity for existing ground floors to be converted to residential uses. But the codes as they stand today, well, minus the temporary prohibition, but if we were to revert back to the regulations that exist today, that would all be prohibited. And I think, the conclusion here is that having any use, active use, use of the ground floor is better than having the vacancies. That's definitely not eyes on the street. And even though the residential uses maybe don't quite provide the same level of interaction with the street, there's still presence there. There's still people occupying those spaces. And I would contend that with the standards that require the windows to be stepped up, people in their units have greater kind of vantage point to look over the sidewalk. And I think that has the effect of contributing to kind of the eyes on the street that we know and understand to be something that helps keep the streets safer. So this feels like the approach that is appropriate for the kind of circumstances that we're facing right now.
These standards have been endorsed by the Design Commission
With,
or proposed by the Design?
These amendments.
as amended, yes.
Well,
And-
the Design Commission they came and gave their testimony at the last.
Right.
And what we're saying, they are not supportive of having units that, on the ground floor, that do not have access from the exterior. And we are saying that the staff's recommendation continues to be that those kinds of units should be allowed, and that the proposal has development or design standards both for units that you do have individual access from the sidewalk and those that do not. And the minor changes to the metric from 6 to 7 feet that the Design Commission is proposing, we have no problem with that. That would be fine if the commission wanted to entertain an amendment on that. I think what we are suggesting, though, is that we retain the flexibility to have both units that are accessed from the sidewalk and units that are accessed from the interior.
It's not a wholesale change too, right? Wasn't there, it's just a reduction in ground floor retail requirement? There are still areas.
So I want to be clear, there isn't a ground floor retail requirement. There's an active ground floor use requirement, and there always has been. And residential uses have been one of those uses that are been prescribed as an active ground floor use. The problem has been, the way they've been developed was right up on the sidewalk at level, closed blinds. So you might as well have a blank wall. By elevating, stepping back, much higher possibility of keeping those windows open, these outside exterior areas, more interaction with the public realm. So these are active uses. There's been a notion that we require retail. We don't. That has been the go-to response by the development community, and in my opinion, they have overprescribed the amount of retail the Central City can maintain, especially at this point in time. So this allows us to go back and kind of reactivate some of these areas.
Troy, can I clarify, though? I do believe that, if my understanding is correct, that where there's an active ground floor requirement, it is true that retail is not the only allowable use, but actual residential units have to be 20 or 25 feet back. So they really aren't meant to.
The depth of the unit had to be 25 foot back in the interior, not the unit itself. It wasn't set back from the right-of-way.
I'm seeing
Yeah.
a difference of opinion.
Shannon, would you like to come up and clarify this point, please? Because I think there's something here that we're
Thank
not
you.
quite
This is a
hitting
wonderfully
upon.
juicy discussion. I'm so glad we're having it.
Because I thought you couldn't even have like a multifamily amenity on the first floor. It wasn't considered an active ground floor use too.
You can have lobbies. Sorry, Shannon Buno, with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. You can have lobbies and offices on the ground floor as well.
Okay.
You could not have a residential dwelling unit on the ground floor. It has to be set back 25 feet from the front of the building.
For those streets that
On
are on
those
that
streets,
map.
that's correct.
That's all. So we're reducing the number of streets on that map where that prohibition exists. But things like lobbies or maybe like exercise rooms of buildings, those are allowed currently. Those are among the active uses.
So, sorry, so the unit, the face of the unit has to be 25 feet back from, is that what you mean by that? Or just the depth of the unit has to be?
No, the whole unit needs to be set back. So if you had like an interior courtyard, you could have units on the inside on the interior courtyard. That's a change we made several years ago with a recap, I believe.
Only on the streets that are
That's right.
identified on the map on where there's a green line. So
Right.
the other streets, you can have the ground floor unit right up on the sidewalk.
Okay. On the green line signifying where cannot have
The ground floor unit.
ground floor
Right on the right of way.
residential.
You'd have to be set back.
The idea was that it would be other kinds of more active uses, and that if there was residential on the ground floor, it was essentially facing an interior courtyard, for example, and not facing the public street.
So how did you decide which streets?
Well, block to block, like if you think street to street, you have enough space to have interior facing units and something different happening on
But
the,
was there something about the
streets, yeah.
character of downtown you were trying to achieve with those streets?
Am I on? Yes, hi, Commissioners. Rachel Hoy, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So in the 2035 plan, we worked with PBOT and we developed a street hierarchy. So we looked at our boulevards, our heavier commercial retail corridors. We looked at our kind of sleepier neighborhood, more flexible streets. And so we mapped that street hierarchy. And then that helped us align the hierarchy with what we wanted the adjacent land uses to be. So that did result in the existing map, which has a very heavy pattern of green, where we thought, but it really is aligned with the central downtown retail core. What we've found through the proposal is that we could back off on those requirements a bit, as we know that there's also a need for housing and housing production. So we wanted to really focus more, the fewer green lines on truly the retail main streets. I mean, I guess think about it more of kind of those core commercial streets that we really wanted to focus our attention on. And then the other streets would remain very flexible for residential development.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Is there anything that we have learned since the housing regulatory relief policy? Are we doubling down, or are we extending the experiment, or is this a proven benefit?
Chair Rath, I would say that given that there's been so little development, we don't have necessarily concrete projects to refer to. What we do have is the ongoing high level of ground floor vacancy that we're trying to also be responsive to. And I would actually say, I'd have to, if we can bring this back to the next meeting or share this. We were tracking some of the HRR, projects that were invoking HRR. And I do think there were actually a couple of proposals that came in to convert existing ground floors to residential.
So one other topic that came up 2 weeks ago when we talked about this was the ability to do live work units. And there is absolutely no barrier in the zoning code to doing that. The majority of the central city is zoned for mixed-use residential development. And in that zone, the CX, the EX, and the RX zones, you are allowed to do live work units. There's some nuance, though, in the state building code. So it's not that you can't do them, but they're usually a little more expensive. There's a different occupancy classification. It hasn't prohibited from these types of projects from happening. We've seen them in different parts of the city as well as the central city. There's a few in the Pearl. But it just makes it a little different than if you were doing a commercial or retail space or residential space on its own. But there's no barrier at all in the zoning code to doing that. Okay. So there were some questions about the parking provisions, especially the surface parking provisions. So I just want to walk back over those again real fast. In terms of the temporary surface parking proposal, again, this is for sites that are vacant, usually gravel, and intended more often to be gravel. What we would be doing is saying that you could do parking for no more than 5 years. The area dedicated to parking had to have been vacant for 5 years, so that prevents people from taking down a building to create a new space for parking. Performance guarantee comes along with that. Mud and dust and erosion control occurs while it's in operation. Following that operation, the gravel is reseeded. And these do not apply to any of the existing surface parking lots. There's a question we need to get into a little bit more about, could a former building pad be used? Because that's considered development, and there's nuances in what's considered development, what's considered vacant, and all of that. So we need to figure that out in terms of what that could be done. But generally, the idea would be to try to allow for a vacant building pad like that to be used. So we're going to do a little more work on that. These provisions are really helpful for the master plan sites. So what we find is when you go to the Broadway corridor site here in the lower right-hand, probably the key development site on there is the intersection of Holt and Ninth. It's got a parking structure on it. They need that parking for that site currently and adjacent uses. If we allow them to do temporary parking, they could take that building down, put in a new parking, hopefully it includes structured parking as well, and then once that 5-year period for the temporary is over, it goes away and they start using that site or other sites on there. Same condition exists at the Lloyd. Some of the key development sites at the Lloyd Mall are all parking structures. They're going to need to come down, but there is going to be a need during the interim period for some on-site parking. So we'd allow them to do the temporary parking until more structured situations can come online with further development. So that was the idea behind that. Sense a question.
So it makes sense to me that when you have a master plan that is contemplating redevelopment, that you could have a provision like this. I feel like you can regulate what happens with those areas a lot better through the master plan process, especially if you're requiring performance guarantees, which I have a question about. But outside of a master plan on just isolated lots, what is going to prevent folks from tearing down their building?
Well, they would have to
And
be
putting
torn
in a
down, and
parking
then they'd
lot.
have to wait 5 years before they could do parking on it. So
So there's a delay of 5 years. I thought it was a 5-year limit on how long they could have the lot.
both. So there's a 5-year limit on how long you can have the parking, and that site that you're putting it on had to have been vacant for 5 years.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
So if it was vacant for 4 years, then you can only get,
Can't do
and
anything.
you can get 4 years, and when you wait a year?
Nope, you have to wait, you'd have to wait a year.
You could wait a year, and then it'd be 5 years, and then you'd only get 4 years. So sunsets determined 5 years from whenever this is enacted on how long you can have it.
No, it's 5 years from when you propose to do the parking.
But when it's enacted, it has to have already been unused for 5 years.
Yes,
Got it.
yes. And there's a handful of these sites around the central city, and they happen to be in areas where there's some development pressure. So the idea would be those areas can be temporarily parked as this new development comes online, provides its own parking. Parking moves to there, the temporary parking goes away.
How many of these are situations where the ground floor active use is desirable? So are we talking about having a space in the middle of an otherwise developed set of blocks and you're walking by active uses and all of a sudden you're walking by a parking lot? Are we enabling that kind of?
For a 5-year period, we are, but I would argue that the site's already vacant and not being used for anything currently. So I'm not sure if I would say that a vacant lot is better than a surface parking lot.
Yeah.
But
No.
it's one or the other.
Can I just make sure that we're all on the same page here? Because Commissioner Ames had just asked or said it has to have been vacant for 5 years when it's enacted. And I think you agreed with that, but I thought that I had understood previously that the date of enactment has no bearing. It's just at any point in time, once a site has been once it's been vacant for 5 years, then at that time you would qualify.
Yes, enactment would be it's a phrase we would probably use for more like when the code became implemented or something. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is you cannot put, the simplest way to say this, if you have a site and you want to put surface parking on it, the area you want to put the parking on has to have been vacant for 5 years before you put parking on it, regardless of when you do this. If you do it tomorrow, it would have to have been vacant for the last 5 years. If you do it 10 years from now, it will have to have been vacant for the prior 5 years. Then once you put that parking in place, it's only valid for an additional 5 years, and then it's got to go.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, I just, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why we didn't want to just go the enactment date route to sort of provide this flexibility as a near-term thing in the zoning code and then it goes away and, it doesn't exist in perpetuity?
I don't know. I can't think we've explored that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is it looking at the current climate and trying to find responses that would be helpful to development. And so the Central City 2035 plan really clamped down on surface parking for all good reasons that we all know about, why we don't want to encourage surface parking in our central core. However, there are limited instances when parking makes sense and there is some current need for parking in some isolated circumstances. So, for example, I think this, the whole idea of the temporary surface parking proposal came about as a result of a site where there's a long-term development proposal for the site, but because of the economic climate that we're in, there's no ability to move forward on that proposal. And the request, there was a request, can we use the site in the interim for surface parking? So this is us trying to be responsive to real on the ground conditions that are happening right now and trying to give people some flexibility in this time when development is just not able to take off. It's not, people are having trouble financing projects. And so that's really the impetus, but then the application to the master plan sites, that has some very clear implication for the master plan sites because often those are large sites that are going to be phased development and people may need to incorporate some surface parking as they're phasing their development. And so again, from that perspective, if it helps facilitate those projects, it seems like a reasonable compromise to do so. And so we're just trying to create that little bit of flexibility. And then there's the somewhat related provision about that's not temporary, but the idea that there are some lots in the central city where there's, highway infrastructure overhead, and those sites really will not be able to be developed with, buildings, multi-story buildings. And so the idea that these areas actually have functioned as surface parking that support a variety of uses. And so we're trying to kind of memorialize that that's an acceptable use for some of those more constrained sites. So these kind of go hand in hand. And there's real use cases for, why these proposals came to be. There were specific instances of issues that came up that we're trying to address.
So what is a performance guarantee?
How's that work?
I need to call a friend.
Performance bond?
Yeah, I was just trying to find that in the code here. Takes us, yeah.
Hello again. So performance guarantees are described in the 700s chapter of the zoning code, the administration chapter, and they are, The types of guarantees may be in the form of a performance bond payable to the city in cash, by certified check, time certificate of deposit, or revocable letter of credit. The amount of the guarantee must be equal to at least 110% of the estimated cost of performance. So it's essentially the city takes a check, and if they don't clear it all out in 5 years, the city can use that money and do the work for them. Or if they comply and get rid of the surface parking area, then they get their performance guarantee back.
Okay.
And I would just add that I think that performance guarantee, if the city were to hold on to the funding, I mean, there are provisions within the regulation. They have to return it, they have to seed it. We don't want to have just a gravel dusty lot. So there are things that need to happen to the lot that would enable the city to do that.
Sure. Well, so within a central city master plan makes total sense. Under freeways, I mean, that's actually been the de facto situation for a while. I'm having trouble, and this just relates to the history I have with the central city master plan, which was 30 years ago, where they always found a way to maintain surface parking. And I worry about the loophole. And I can't articulate it any better than that, but the people who own parking lots, at least in my experience, always find a way to keep them going. So that's my concern. I don't know
Commissioner
what I'll
Knowles,
do with that, but
Can I just add one thing? I think one thing I just want to raise for everyone's consideration, because we were talking about this in the team as we were preparing for the meeting. I think one of the things that you might be reacting to, and that is logical to react to, is the fact that there are a lot of existing surface parking lots in the central city. Those conditions are conditions that they're non-conforming, they're legal non-conforming instances of surface parking. They have existed for a long time. They're legal. The code changed, but they are allowed to continue. This isn't going to change that. And this isn't going to create new situations like that where you can just have surface parking. The idea is these are truly, for a limited term. I think it's easy to feel nervous about it because we look around in the built environment and we see a lot of surface parking lots, but those predate all of those regulations. And I just want to make sure to kind of, lift that up for consideration as we're having this conversation.
I also just want to add to that the temporary parking is accessory, so it's for the associated development that's requesting the temporary parking. They can't do commercial parking. So they're not,
Freestanding,
they're not going to put up a sign to
okay, so
allow
that
for.
wasn't clear from what I was reading. So these are not, this cannot be the primary use,
Right, this
commercial
cannot.
parking.
That's
It's
right.
just accessory to another use
That's correct.
on the same site? Or are there restrictions on how far away that accessory is?
I believe it's the same site, same ownership? No.
Sorry, I know I'm going down this rabbit hole a
Okay.
long ways.
Parking has to be within 500 feet, I think, of the use. So it doesn't have to be right on the same space, but it has to be within proximity of the use.
Okay.
But they can't charge for it?
They can charge for it, but they can't turn it into commercial parking. It can't, the primary use of that parking lot cannot be commercial parking.
So it should be for, even if it's 500 feet away, it's for the building that they're supporting with that. So we have an example where, as Patricia was pointing out, where they have a development plan. They can't move forward with the development plan yet, but they want parking for their employees. And it's about 300 feet away from that half block. So they would be utilizing, whether they charge or not, but it is for their employees, as opposed to posting it for anybody to come and park in a commercial lot.
Does it have to be wholly associated with that use or just primarily associated with the use?
Entirely.
Okay,
The
thank you.
code specifically says it cannot be commercial parking, any of it.
So no event parking in the evening?
I mean, unless the event is at the building, they have their own event, they could probably use it for their people coming to their event, but it should not be event
Okay.
parking
All
for
right, thank
something
you.
else.
Are we good on parking?
Sorry.
No, this is
I'm-
great. I assume on snow, I have a couple more questions. For temporary surface parking, are other uses, I assume like a pop-up market also allowed?
They would be allowed today on
Food
that
carts,
site.
yeah, okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's just the parking cannot be like a commercial operation, a commercial parking, like we have the commercial parking lots around town. Yeah.
No, I appreciate all of your questions. Thank you.
There was a question last time about the urban form considerations in terms of how we set the allowances for height and FAR on some of the master plan sites. And was it complementary or consistent with what's going on around those sites? And so I just gave you two examples here. The one is the Albina Vision Trust proposal for the master plan site at the PPS headquarters and then the Lloyd Mall. Those both sites are indicated in red. So what we've done is we've set the FAR on those sites to be, adjacent, like north of the Lloyd, it's 6-1, and then it starts to go down even further as you get closer to the Irvington Historic District. Similarly, on the Albina site, one side is 4-1, which is closer to the Rose Quarter. As you get closer to the Industrial District and to the Elliott neighborhood, it starts to transition down. Height-wise, we've made the heights consistent with the Lloyd as we have the rest of that portion of the Lloyd district. And similarly with the Albina Vision site, it's similar to what's going on at the Rose Quarter site. So we're effectively not trying to create Oz in a sea of smaller development when we do these. We're trying to make it consistent. There's also a number of criteria that goes into the Central City Master Plan that's also addressing that continuation of a similar urban form. So I just wanted to make sure we address that concern. Move on, okay. Height step down to Skidmore Old Town. When we presented last week, we showed that this transition area between the downtown district, the office core, and the Skidmore Historic District, there we were proposing heights of 250 feet. And there was some testimony that was concerned that maybe that was going to overshadow the district. So we were asked by the commission to do some additional analysis and look at what would the existing heights just outside of that transition, which are at 460 feet today, how do those shadows affect the district? And as you can see, and it's probably easier to see on these right-hand March 21st images, that the existing shadows exceed what we're proposing. So our proposal does not create more shadowing. It just falls into the shadow that's already there. And that is both true for the spring equinox as well as the summer solstice. So this proposal for height should not have any additional impact on the district. I have absolutely no idea. Our architects in our urban design studio modeled it. Yeah.
Just what modeling platform? Yeah.
And then there was a question about Icarus and solar panels, and was there a disadvantage to one or the other? We've done a fair amount of outreach over the last 2 weeks to different folks and folks who deal with Icarus, people who deal with solar panels, and there really isn't a disadvantage to one or the other. They just achieve different outcomes. If you could do them both, there's some additional advantages, but we're just really trying to allow for flexibility. It depends on the program of the building. Are you trying to deal with energy and carbon issues, or are you trying to deal with stormwater and pollinator and urban heat island issues? You choose the programming you're using for the objectives you have for that built development. So we're allowing more flexibility. Currently, it's eco roof only. We're opening it up to either or.
Was the shadow analysis that you just shared the same one that was shared with the Historic Landmarks Commission, or is this an updated shadow analysis?
It was updated because they had not asked. We only showed them the analysis for actually, I'm not even sure we showed the analysis for that then at the time. But we were, at the time, we had not been asked to look at what the impact of the shadows were outside of the area.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I don't understand the technology. Are solar plant panels and eco roofs mutually exclusive?
No, they can work together fine, but we're allowing you to do one or the other, or you can do both if you choose to. Right now, though, the code says you're supposed to do 60% of your cover as eco roof.
Right, and we had testimony from people objecting to changing that,
They're concerned with not doing eco roof and only doing
solar
solar.
panels,
Yes.
okay?
Because there would be no economic benefit for a developer to want to do eco-roof while solar has energy and utility benefits. So I think that's probably the consideration they're thinking of.
I would also, I mean, I think they both have benefits, as Troy has explained a little bit here in our previous presentation. And we can provide you more information. We did a lot of research on eco roofs and also looked at solar panels, for the 2035 plan. We landed with a provision that the current provision for eco roofs, working with the Bureau of Environmental Services. It does have benefits in the central city to handle some stormwater. It doesn't handle all, but it's certainly, I mean, there's still going to be runoff that needs to be managed at another location on a site. So I think that what we're expressing here is that there are definite benefits to both. And at this moment, we are offering what we think is a proposal that just offers that flexibility that a developer could choose depending on the development proposal that they're putting forward. One may work better than the other. We do have several developments in the central city that actually do both. And that does function well together too. So this provision to do either or would not prevent someone from doing both as well.
I think the question is, wouldn't they choose to do solar if you're a developer because they would see the pocket benefit a little bit better? I see the stormwater advantage. I'm a stormwater, wastewater engineer. I understand that there are definitely stormwater improvement benefits to eco-roof, but I even know within the city of Portland, the facilities that are built by the city of Portland don't all have eco-roofs. And that requirement was part of the specifications for quite a while, and it went by the wayside. So that further decreases the amount of stormwater eco-roofs that you would see if you allow them to do either or, because solar is going to have a benefit to their pocket immediately.
Patricia Diefenhofer for the record. I'll just offer two thoughts. One is this was also an HRR topic, a housing regulatory relief, and it was quite controversial. But what we are, and I think it ended up remaining as current, right? If I'm recalling correctly. So there was a proposal to change it in HRR, and there was testimony, in opposition, and ultimately the current standard, which is the eco-roof standard, was retained. Here we are again with the permanent regulations, once again suggesting that we allow for both and allow that flexibility. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is that development they have to manage their stormwater in some way, right? And so if it behooves them, if they have to, in order to meet their to manage their stormwater, if they have to do an eco roof, then they're going to do an eco roof, even though, to your point, Commissioner Brandon, they may be a little bit more compelled to do the solar versus the eco roof. The other thing is we did research at the time of HRR, and this was one of the provisions that was one of the more adjusted provisions. People were seeking relief from the eco roof provision. I think it's about a third, like 1/3 of the applications are for adjustments to eco roof. So the combination of those two considerations is what leads us to be back here again, recommending that we leave that flexibility to the development, and the development being able to propose something that makes the most sense for the development. And if you recall from the testimony, the person who, I forgot the person's name, I apologize.
Tom Lipton.
Yeah, so I think the person who was at BES at the time, who was very much a kind of, proponent of the eco roof. I think the testimony he provided from the organization he represents was not in opposition to allowing them both. I think that it was a recognition that there's sort of benefits to both. So I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Moving on. Okay. Activation of Waterfront Park.
Yeah, Commissioners, we just wanted to return to this conversation. I think that the commission had some questions, just generally wanted a bit more information on the proposals, as well as there was, I think, a concern about future privatization of the park. So we just wanted to walk through again with you for Governor Tom McCall Waterfront Park. First, I just wanted to acknowledge that there is a lot going on right now to activate the park, and Portland Parks and Rec is about to embark on a design competition for the park this summer and fall that will result in a design for Waterfront Park Bowl area as well as the broader park. And this effort will incorporate, hopefully, multiple functions and uses within the park to better activate the riverfront and the adjacent neighborhood. As well, a related effort, this commission earlier this year received a presentation on the Central City Waterfront Urban Design Study that BPS brought forward, a study we produced. That's also an input study to the design competition that'll be happening later this summer. And that study lays out strategies for future redevelopment, waterfront activation, and public investment in the park and the downtown area. So this and many of you have, I think, probably also been involved with a number of private entities that have been working on Waterfront Park and the adjacent downtown neighborhood. For example, Design PDX is one of them. There are a number of different charrettes and activities that many of us have been engaged in, all in this effort to consider short and long-term activation for the park and adjacent area. So keeping all of this in mind, what we are putting forward here through the Central City Amendments Project is we've been considering a lot of this ongoing work, and we'd like to provide more flexibility for the future activation of the park as we're entering into not only the design competition, but as we've been also engaged in many of these efforts around the city. So what we have here is, just to share with you again, we're suggesting expanding uses within the park and to allow commercial outdoor recreation in major event entertainment uses. Right now, commercial outdoor recreation is a conditional use in the park, and major event entertainment is prohibited within the park. So this proposal would allow both of them within the park. And we're also proposing through this project to increase retail sales and services within the park. A small amount can be done right now within the park as part of Central City 2035 plan. The proposal here for a site as large as Tom McCall would be, and this site is over 50,000 square feet, that you could do something of the size or small retail spaces up to 5% of the total site area. The other thing, the one thing I just want to point out about that as well is that, just thinking about these different types of uses in the park, that Portland Parks and Rec is the owner and manager of the park. It will always remain a public park, and any future use for this park would also have to be, would be required to go through a special permitting process that Portland Parks and Rec has for any sort of type of activity, whether it was a major event activity, a commercial outdoor activity of any sort. Parks would have the authority to review that use for compatibility of any uses within the park and set conditions of approval on any future uses that they may approve. So in addition to that, as part of this project, we're also proposing to reduce the river setback from what is now 50 feet to 25 feet. So this is an image that we didn't share with you at the last meeting, but I just want to show along a portion of Tomahawk, which is a narrow park. Currently, the blue is the full property extent of the park. The orange line shows a 50-foot setback, which exists today, and the proposal is to reduce that to 25 feet. So the setback was changed to 50 feet during Central City 2035. So we're proposing to return it back to the 25 feet, which would be consistent with where we were in 2020. And again, the reason for this being, it is a narrow park, and part of the effort here and the work that Parks and Rec is doing to bring more activation to this park, it will help bring more people closer to the river, bring access closer to the river and other amenities. And it just allows for more flexibility as we enter into not only the design competition, but as I mentioned, a number of the other efforts that are underway to allow for more flexibility for future activation of the park. I'll pause there, see if there are any questions.
Just one, I think you said major event activities are prohibited?
Major event entertainment is a use in the zoning code, and those are prohibited. So temporary basis, so if you think about like the Blues Fest,
Right.
Those are temporary activities, those are allowed. But if we were to have if there was a structure to build.
A permanent installation,
A permanent
a
installation.
permanent stage built in the bowl,
That's correct.
that would be prohibited. I see. Okay, thanks.
When we're talking about the commercial recreation and major events and entertainment, is there any provision that would still allow public access for a certain amount of time, or would that all come out through the conditions of approval through this more discretionary process that you were talking about?
So all of any future uses will remain public. I mean, the park remains public. Anything that's to be developed in the future will have public access. I mean, the whole point of allowing more flexibility and more uses is to increase flexibility in the future of what we can see at the park around recreation and future access. Does that answer your
Well, I
question?
guess I'm thinking just a hypothetical scenario about the bowl, the Tomahawk Bowl. If that does end up becoming some sort of performance venue or something, and there's a way of controlling the perimeter, and then it's like fenced in, and what happens during like non-performance times? Like, is it just, I understand that the property is still owned by the city and that the public can come in if they pay, but like, how is it still something that everyone can access?
Commissioners, one of the considerations to be aware of here is that even as much as what the city zoning will, lay the framework for what can be built. There's also the statewide planning goal, Goal 15, which requires that the Willamette River, that there's a greenway preserved and that it is preserved for the purposes of making sure that people have access to the river, making sure that there's continuous trails along the river, protecting, the recreational opportunities as well as the habitat and natural resources. So any project that is proposed ultimately still has to meet those thresholds as well, and those thresholds are built into the city's zoning code. So the setback is one way of ensuring that, but in addition to the setback, there is the requirement, there are the requirements of Goal 15, which are embedded in one of our code sections as well. So I think, I point this out to say that I think that those, in addition to the process, the parks process that Rachel described, that provides a backstop for making sure that anything that's proposed is not going to, constrain that access. So for example, when we talk internally and we talk with our parks partners about the possibilities in the future, one of the things that we talk about is if there's a use that is otherwise, limited in terms of the access or the time in which there's access, one of the ways to be able to comply with Goal 15 is to make sure that there in fact is some kind of viewing platform or some kind of, even if it's one public access point that is available, no matter what, it's not limited by the activities that are happening at the site, or it's not subject to, you having to pay to be there. So I think these are all considerations. I think the details of this will be worked out through future planning processes and through the parks permitting process when any specific proposal is put forward. What we're trying to do in the zoning code, as is, there's a running theme, I think, through a lot of the provisions that are proposed here, which is we're just trying to make sure that the zoning code doesn't become a barrier for some of the kinds of things that the city is trying to accomplish in terms of revitalization of the downtown and activation of the waterfront in this case.
Have you looked at Seattle's waterfront and their shoreline master code? I think it is still 50. So why would we be reducing ours? And they just went through a revitalization of their waterfront and as well.
I know that Parks has looked at several different cities and major destinations across the country, so I'm sure that probably is one of them. We can take a closer look at that. I guess I would just point out again, just the narrow nature of Tom McCall at certain places at 50 feet. It really does limit what can be directly adjacent to the river. I wouldn't even say directly adjacent to the river, but it really limits what could be within that 50 feet for river access.
And then also a benefit cost ratio for maintenance of new facilities that Parks owns. They tend to be really excited about new facilities. I think of that aquatic water park, and then there's never funding to maintain those. And so until that's really decided, it seems, I know we're opening things up for the future, but it is difficult to think of the future when there's a lot of assets that Parks owns that they cannot afford to maintain.
Commissioner Brennan, this is a very active kind of conversation and discussion happening within the city and with many external, interests and partners. I think that among the things that is being discussed is, should there be a different governance model for Waterfront Park, especially as we are interested in activating it at levels that are kind of, much more, require a lot more maintenance and programming to have it function in the way that I think people envision it functioning in the future. So I think that all of these things together, again, these are very active discussions. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of things being worked out. This is this move here is essentially table setting, just trying to make sure, once again, that the code is not a barrier to any of these things happening. And then there's a lot of other processes that are going on and conversations that are going on with a lot of engagement, like the design competition and what happens at the park, the actual park is meant to be a, civic engagement opportunity, lots of people. There's a project advisory committee, lots of people are going to be involved in the process. So, and I'll just say, as it relates to other cities and other examples like Seattle, I don't know the particulars of Seattle's regulations, but, we operate under different regulatory frameworks, right? State of Oregon has a particular, even at the state level, has these sort of a framework for how the Willamette should be used across the length of the Willamette, regardless of what jurisdiction it's in, right? And so one of those provisions is that there's a setback from the river. It actually does not have a number. There's, in the state law, if you look at the state law, there is no number associated with what is a setback. It could be 5 feet, it could be 50 feet, it could be, there's nothing. So I think we're sort of taking cues from what we've done in the past. We've researched, precedent examples in other places in the state, not outside the state, because, they're not, outside of the state is not going to be subject to these same regulations. And we're trying to infer from that what is an acceptable setback. And again, these are active conversations. And so we're just trying to create a little bit of space for this conversation to continue through the design process and other processes.
And this is supposed to be that as well, like it's a work session, so I
Sure.
can ask questions.
Of course, yeah, of course you can. I'm just trying to share what the rationale is and why this is being brought to the Planning Commission at this time. Absolutely.
What's the, along the narrow part of Tomahawk Park, what's the depth from the seawall to NATO? It looks like it's 150 feet or something like that.
Yeah, it varies. I'd say it's around 150 to 175 feet.
I have a question relating to the waterfront. Not really related to the setback, but towards the water in general for the waterfront park planning. How much is ecological protection and restoration for the river being considered in our planning for this area, just given how ecologically important and just generally important the Willamette River is to our central city?
I would say that given the Tomahawk Park, I think we have numbers. I don't know, Rachel, if you remember, the Parks Department did some measuring, and more than 2/3 of the park is actually behind the seawall. And so, in fact, I mean, that's one of the considerations that's informing this a little bit, is that there actually isn't a lot of natural area and natural resources, if you will, in the Tomahawk Park. And so I think that is one of the reasons that I think points us in the direction of this reduced setback, being appropriate, because there's not the natural resources that you might have in other parts of the river, and there's also this element of wanting to, try to really activate the waterfront for purposes of revitalization of the central city. So it's balancing these objectives.
Right. And I understand that. That makes sense. I saw in the report when I was reading it that, in fact, riparian resources along the seawall are ranked lower than they would, say, near the natural park near the Hawthorne Bowl. Is there any interest in, as time goes on, trying to more properly redress along the seawall? Because obviously it is more important to protect what is already naturally there, but what would be naturally there on, say, like the Hawthorne Bowl would be without human intervention along the entire waterfront. So I'm just kind of asking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly some conversations about, could there be alternatives to the seawall, looking at places where there could be different treatments than the seawall. I think those are some perhaps long-term aspirations, but they certainly involve, there's a lot of steps to get there. There's, funding considerations, there's a lot of different permitting considerations. So that, that would be something that would be much longer term. And this is trying to be a little bit tactical about what can happen in the nearer term, understanding that there's a lot of things that still steps that need to be taken.
Yeah, I see. I was just putting it out there just to see how much it's being considered or thought of, even if it may not be within the short-term scope of this project.
And I would just point out, we do have along the seawall and along the trail, along our riverfront in general, we have the trail, we have the Greenway Trail, which will remain intact. So, I mean, that trail now, as we know, is probably, it's about 15 to 12 feet within Waterfront Park, right along the seawall, and then along through the bowl as well.
So you said this got changed in the 2035 project to 50.
Across the full, not just in the park.
So what was the rationale at that time? And are you, the Bureau decided to take another run at this because that's not what you wanted last time? I'm just curious what the history is.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can come back to you with a little bit more detail on the history. And it wasn't, again, just focused on the park at the time. For Central City, it was the full Central Reach. There was a much bigger effort by the River and Environmental team, and they expanded the setback to 50 feet across on both sides for the full Central Reach of the river.
So it was part of a bigger.
It was a much bigger
Okay.
project, that's
Gotcha.
correct. And so this particular effort, and I think just where we are with the activation effort for Waterfront Park, we're looking at the proposal of just for the park itself, for the reduction to 25 feet.
I have a question. First, thank you for answering all of our questions. I know that we have a lot of them. And that continues. Will the crow, and this is an actual question, will the crows and or geese be angry with us?
I think geese are always angry.
Outside of fledgling crow season.
That's my favorite question so far, thank you. Gosh, I don't know, probably. I could imagine they won't be very happy about it, but who knows?
I'm hearkening back to Micah's testimony.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think this is our final slide. We've talked about many of these topics, but I think I would just reiterate, as Patricia and Troy had both pointed out, this project, when it came together, was to be very tactical and strategic to make some updates to the Central City Plan District Code and maps. And there have been a lot of things that have come up during this process, and there are a lot of proposed changes to remove barriers and add flexibility. But we've identified along the way, there are a number of things that we need to also accomplish in the future. So some of these items, while outside of the scope of this project, we wanted to actually just put these out there of things that we're tracking. So we are very interested in doing some more work to look at how Portland compares with other cities in terms of height limits and FAR standards, and how their FAR transfer models work, and how those systems work maybe better than our own. How do other cities compare to ours with housing production, and how do they deal with tower development, but also make sure that there's sufficient parking for those new towers and housing. So these are just some examples. I think Troy had also pointed out that we did discover during this process some of the impacts to adding height on lots that are 20,000 square feet and less. So I think some additional research we also have to do is how can we dial in that relationship a little bit more to increasing height and floor area on lots that are of that size. And then another is looking a little bit more closely. You've heard a bit about the ground floor standards that we're proposing to add. We'd like to also make sure that we take a closer look at all of our Central City design guidelines that we have. This has been a project we've wanted to do for some time, so that is also on our list to help us just continue to look at the public realm and our design that we offer, and to be more efficient within our Central City. And that's it for us, and happy to take any other questions that you may have on any of the previous topics.
I have a question that I think is probably going to get me into trouble, and it's I keep coming back to heights, and I heard in a previous slide, in the initial ones, I've spent the last hour and a half. It's like, can I get past it? No, I cannot. So I'm bringing it up. That market conditions and not zoning or constraining development, more or less, and yet it also seems I have heard, I also heard that, that there is a height that pencils better. And I'm hearing that in tension with wanting to preserve our scenic corridors. And so I guess one of my questions, when we are experiencing an ongoing housing crisis and development is the number one thing that we are concerned about, who benefits from the scenic corridors? How much do we care? And I ask it as an honest question.
I want to that I share this question. When we do talk about scenic views, what at least just comes to my mind is usually people living in the West Hills and their view. And it is not often that I hear it rebutted that we're concerned about people on the East Side's views or anything like that. So I would like to just add on that. I asked the same question.
Can I make one small note here? I do want to flag that we don't protect private views, we protect public views. So they are from publicly located locations, and they are Goal 5 state resources. So they're not without some standing. So just to put that out there.
And that's why mine is an honest question. Yeah.
Just
My understanding is, I'm sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
I was going to say on that point, I mean, I think if you look at building heights and correspondence to affordable units, that buildings that would start to butt up against these height thresholds may be less likely. I mean, there is the IZ requirement, so there would be something there, but above 7 stories getting into like type 1 construction, there's a cost there. So that's kind of where, because I have a similar question, but that's how I've been thinking about that a little bit.
So I'm hearing you say like that would be, those would not help us towards the affordability for our city?
I don't know that I feel like it's gonna just it's scenic corridors are the impediment to, production, or would be even a measurable needle mover.
Sure. Okay, great.
So I was just going to, I think, say what Troy said. The scenic resources are public viewpoints. They're not assessed and don't exist for somebody's mansion in the West Hills. They exist for the Rose Garden and some other points. I mean, there used to be, maybe you're proposing to get rid of this, but there was one from the corner of Albina near Tubman School. There's a scenic
Still there.
view corridor.
Yeah, still there. And when we did the 2035 plan, they went back and reevaluated all of them.
Yeah.
There were some that were thinned down, there were some that were added, but I think there's less than we had before, but then we were able to better dial in how to protect those as well by how we're creating these corridors.
So I think there's a number of them around the city that are from public places, not
They're generally prominent locations, parks and locations like that.
And on the bridges, we have several that are just what you're walking across the bridge or you're down in the park, looking on either side of the river at downtown or looking to Mount Hood, Rose Garden, but they're all they're public views from public locations.
So to clarify, from places like Pittock Mansion and places like that in that area. All right, I got it. My mistake.
I had one on my way to work every day. I had on a nice day a view of Mount Hood, and it was blocked by the Ritz-Carlton, and that bothered me at first, but I've gotten over it. You know, it really did bother me at first though, because I was used to seeing it every day, or when it was nice. But
And I'll say, I was at Washington Park over the weekend, and we were having a wonderful conversation, and it was a great view. And yeah, and also I just come back to, you know, where can we, like, are there areas where we can just punch it up? Question I have. The thoughts, main questions, questions that you want to seed me so that I'm the person who looks dumb?
Are we talking about amendments at this meeting, or is that a future meeting? Am I getting ahead of things?
Yeah, I would like to suggest that with the time that we have, we could certainly talk about amendments. We were also going to share a schedule with you, so if there's no ideas right now or they're not fully formed, we could outline a schedule of ideally when you would give us your feedback so that we could prepare it for the next meeting. So just to outline what that schedule would look like, we would be looking for your comments or your amendment ideas by the 16th of June so that we can work through them, work with individual commissioners as needed to post them by July 6th. And then in preparation for the July 14th meeting, which is the next work session where we hope that there will be, votes on the amendments and then votes on the recommendation. So that would be the schedule, but we're happy to take sort of any thoughts or ideas right now as well.
I can share where I'm at, if that's helpful. So on the ground floor retail, I'm generally supportive of the use being allowed, or I'm sorry, ground floor residential. But I do think that maintaining provisions that provide greater flexibility and connectivity to the street to reinforce the urban realm is important. And so I'm pretty receptive to the testimony that we received from Design Commission, and I also wanted to look back at the housing regulatory relief about some of the other measures that we looked at that time around like floor-to-floor height and other things that would allow for that ground floor to evolve over time. Because I think that, even though we're in a moment where we're looking at the need right now, we run into challenges when we don't think about what will the future condition be. So that's one. And then on the industrial sites, this is sort of a gut sense based on limited personal experience. I would like to go back to the CEIC testimony, but it seems like if there are vacant sites or sites that don't have an industrial use, I'm questioning how viable or likely it is that there's ever going to be a new industrial use that comes. And as we're thinking about trying to get more people downtown, it's like, that's almost downtown. It's not, but it's like right there. If we had a couple of, significant developments and we could unlock some of that, I do think that it would have a positive impact just for overall housing production, but also downtown activity. And then I felt like the step down to the historic district was sort of, I don't want to say dismissed. We didn't really get into it. I'd really like to look at the studies that were done a little bit more in detail. So if you could send that. I mean, to me, it stands to reason that the closer you are to a very tall building, the deeper and more penetrating the shadow it's going to cast. So I understand that it is not protected from the increase in heights from the area beyond that buffer zone that was identified by the HLC, but I'm not totally there with that one. So that could be another area for amendments from my part. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Other thoughts? Anyone have anything minor, half-baked? But I'll say, Commissioner Thompson, I really appreciate the first floor residential and the urban realm are top of mind for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on what Erica was talking about, the CEID, just, kind of starting to work with them. I don't know who does that, whether it's us or staff that kind of gets with them to understand if there's some priority areas. I mean, it does seem like what they were asking, it's a lot of space. It's a pretty heavy lift. I know we're trying to keep this, targeted. And so if they are able to identify a few blocks or a few corridors that would really, and they have, really good justification for it, I think it's a good time to do it. I think saying, kicking the can down the road and saying, well, we can evaluate it later, that could be years, And so if we have this opportunity now for doing some rezoning in the area, maybe identifying what some, and I think that coming from them I think they've been around for a long time, and, if they kind of can come up with a few areas, few proposals that we could look at, I think that would make sense.
Commissioner Ames, that's something that staff would do, and we would be happy to reach out to them and see if there's like a more refined area that they would be open to. Again, we're trying to balance those infrastructure issues.
Yeah, Commissioner Knoll.
So we've had several testimony with several requests for changes or for flexibility. The Holy Rosary Church. There was at least one Central East Side property owner. Somebody was a single site.
I think there was one person who testified, and I think we had 2 letters from single sites. So going back to that map we showed earlier, the large blocks of rezone requests, those came in from the Central East Side Industrial Council. So we have
Yes, I understand.
we have a sense of
that.
what their priorities are. And then the others were individual property owners that were adjacent to EX zone.
So I was wondering, are you going to provide an individual response for each of those requests? I mean, they're not in your proposal now. We have a request. What's your response to what the Holy Rosary Church is asking for? And I'm not asking you to do this now. I'm just wondering if you'll be preparing some sort of response.
Commissioner Knowles, we don't typically just respond to each individually. I mean, I think they'll see the proceedings here, and they'll see what commission is proposing to amend and what isn't. I think we have some information about the Holy Rosary site in particular that we could share now or at the next. I think we do, right, Troy?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to spend a moment on that, I think we could, I think it's compelling to see their property ownership and how much parking they already have. And the fact that they could avail themselves of a master plan process. They don't have to, but they could if they wanted to. And then they would be perhaps, be able to access those temporary provisions. So happy to talk about that more now or later, but.
Well, I just want to say I'm not inclined to accept what other people are asking. I'm just interested in whether, if you've had a conversation with these folks and you've decided not to include it in your draft, that's fine. I've just, I'd be inclined to defer to what you guys decided on some of these individual sites. But I don't know that at this point. That's all.
Sorry, you don't know?
I don't know how much conversation you've had with some of the people, the individual owners who have submitted.
Since testimony has
Don't
happened
need
2 weeks ago, we've not been having conversations with folks in large part because it's now in your hands.
Yeah, okay.
So we would need to request more information and then propose an amendment.
if your instruction to us is to talk to folks, I mean, I think it's a little bit more complicated with individual property owners because they're just thinking about individual properties. But if your direction to us is, you know, like I've heard from Commissioner Ames, talk to the Central Industrial Council and see if there's some refinement. I mean, we can do that. I think Troy's right. Once we're before you and it's active in front of you, we're not trying to go out and negotiate with people necessarily. But if that's something you'd like us to do, it seems prudent, we can certainly do that and come back with
Okay.
what we learn.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I understand what I need to do. I need to go look at the public testimony, and if there's something I want to know about, I need to direct the question to you, I guess.
Yep.
Would probably second whatever questions you ask. Yes, because then you'll save me time from doing that as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think I would just add to that, and this was maybe clear, but in addition to talking with the Central East Side Industrial Council, I mean, we will take a look at those 3 individual properties that also submitted testimony in the Central East Side and see what is currently happening with each of those.
And one thing I do want to note again is, regardless of desire, we still need to look at the impacts and the infrastructure to make sure there's capacity there. Yeah.
Because one of them looked pretty compelling. It was across the street from the Go blocks. Is that what that?
Go blocks?
Yeah. And it was kind of under, I don't know. But
Other things on my list are still I want to know more about the 50-foot setback, the context and background of that. And then what you find out about other waterfronts. I know we're looking for our state, but Seattle is kind of a sister city, having a lot of the same issues we are. They're just much larger. So I figure, why not? Look at their development, look what's been done. I don't think they put a new concert venue in their waterfront, but yeah. Oh. And the solar and eco roof concept. I hear that you had discussed that in a different housing situation. I want to hear the context on that. If you can provide just a summary of the discussion on why it stayed the way it was instead of being changed.
For housing regulatory?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Commissioner O'Meara, do you have anything? I know that we've.
I just had a clarifying question regarding the height restrictions. So under HRR or affiliated with that, I can't remember if it was the exact package or a follow-up, we did waive height restriction requirements. And is that what is currently in place? Does that expire along with HRR? And can I get a reminder of when that expiration date is?
Commissioner O'Meara, that's a great question. Yes, the commission did essentially waive the upper limit of the height limits temporarily. I think with bonuses, the bonus height in particular. And that is in place until HRR expires, which I believe is January 1, 2029.
Okay.
I do think, though, that there is a consideration here that if commission approves this package and it's adopted by council, if it replaces those heights, theoretically, it would supersede that interim measure, unless we were
Right.
clear, unless we stated specifically that we still wanted that interim measure to be applicable through January 1, 2029. So in essence, this would be the permanent regulation, but we would be deferring its effective date until the expiration of HRR. Conceivably, that's something we could do, but if this is adopted without any consideration for that, this would supersede that current waiver, if you will.
Right. And what's being proposed in this package goes above and beyond, right? There are differences, or does it mimic what we had approved under the current waiver?
What it does is it raises the maximum bonus heights. So
Even beyond what we have currently approved
beyond
in
what
the
we have
waiver.
currently. So
Correct.
even
Yeah.
if we did not extend the temporary suspension of HRR, the new rules that this represents would be increases in height above at the bonus, the maximum bonus heights, where the base heights are
Correct.
largely staying the same. It's the maximum bonus heights. This would represent increases beyond what is on the books
Beyond
today.
what is, okay. And so would that need to be part of an amendment if we want, or are you saying, Patricia, that if this package is passed, those HRR height limit provisions would just sort of no longer apply because this would be the new standard? Unless we had an amendment that said we want to keep those in place until 2029 and then make the new ones effective.
Yes, I think we would need to clarify that. So if that is the will of the commission, then we would want you to clarify that so that we would write the ordinance that goes to council in that manner.
And I'm not interested. I think I would prefer just for the new package to move forward, but just needed some clarity on the process there, given we have the waiver in place currently.
And to your point, Commissioner O'Meara, that would apply as well to the ground floor, right? So
Correct.
right now,
Correct.
there are all those streets, none of them have the limitation on having ground floor use, right?
Correct.
This would supersede that and would now have replaced the existing map with this new map that would reduce the number of streets where that limitation is.
Right. And then with the eco roofs, I know per your earlier reference, we did address that in HRR, and similar question, is what's being proposed different from the HRR? Because I thought under HRR, we had said it could be an either or as long as 50% of the roof coverage was solar.
Yeah, Commissioner, I apologize. I may be misremembering. I couldn't remember where that landed.
I think we did approve that amendment
okay.
as part of HRR. I proposed it.
flexibility,
So
yeah.
I think we did.
Yeah.
And what I recall is that an eco roof requirement could be waived as long as 50% or greater of the roof coverage included solar infrastructure.
So I think what we're proposing here is essentially memorializing HRR. Is that correct, Rachel, to your?
I think it memorializes HRR in terms of it maintains the choice. The
Correct.
option is available to do solar or eco roof.
Right. Okay. And to that topic, I think in the previous meeting, someone brought up researching or contemplating incentives for eco roofs. So want to speak from the development perspective that absolutely we are incentivized from an operation cost reduction to include solar. And there are a myriad of financial incentives, at least for affordable housing developers, to include solar infrastructure. If there were, however, PSEF incentives or other incentives that allowed us to do both, that would make it sort of more compelling. So I just wanted to respond to the commissioner comments that were brought up earlier and both agree and say, however, if there were incentives around eco roof infrastructure, that could complement those incentives for solar, that would help. And it's probably, it's not part of this package necessarily, but just making that comment around the reality around some of those trade-offs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Yeah.
I just, as Commissioner O'Meara was talking about housing regulatory relief and what all is in that, I'm wondering if it would be possible to have a summary that looks at some of these key topics that you ran through today, and the Senate Bill 15 whatever, 37, that was like, you can automatically get an adjustment, and it's like, what percentage of height? Is it 10%? Like, it's all these things are related, and it would be helpful context to just see, like, to understand how they are related. Also, I think it's helpful context, like, every time we go into it, and it's like, this is the project we're looking at now, but when we're talking about building heights and ground floor residential, some of those things, those tools exist in place now, and it's not necessarily like the floodgates of development have opened and like we're achieving our wildest dreams. It's like, yes, this might help, and also some of these things exist already, and it's the macro issues that you already identified that are the real challenge. So that would be really helpful for me. I feel like a little bit lost in some of the like what we already have and what the different avenues are. So thank you in advance.
Nothing on temporary service parking?
No,
Okay.
I'll bite my tongue.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you all. We've covered so much ground. I appreciate it. And this is going to be continued to July 14th. Our next Planning Commission work session is the 23rd. Thanks to everyone for being here, and as always, to our partners at Open Signal for allowing us to be seen and heard on the internets. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.